The moment my boss looked straight into my eyes inside a crowded gay club, I realized one of us had been keeping a secret. Friday nights were supposed to be simple. Finish work, ignore the endless group chats from coworkers begging everyone to join another loud bar downtown, order takeout, and convince myself that another quiet weekend counted as a healthy work-life balance. Instead, after months of saying no to my best friend Noah, I finally let him drag me somewhere completely outside my comfort zone. The club sat behind an unmarked brick building in the Arts District, glowing only because of a narrow rainbow light above the entrance. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't wild. It felt surprisingly welcoming, filled with laughter, familiar songs, and people who looked genuinely comfortable being themselves. That alone made me feel like an outsider. I had spent years carefully separating every part of my life. At 26, I was a junior graphic designer at Brooks Creative Group, one of the fastest-growing branding agencies in Chicago. I was known as dependable, organized, and probably a little too quiet. Nobody at work knew much about me, and I preferred it that way. My coworkers talked about dating apps, weekend trips, and office gossip while I smiled politely and kept my personal life locked behind carefully chosen words. It wasn't shame that kept me silent. It was caution. Work was complicated enough without giving people another reason to make assumptions. My boss, Adrian Brooks, embodied everything the company admired. 34 years old, impossibly composed, always dressed in tailored navy suits, he spoke with calm confidence that made every client trust him before the presentation even started. He rarely smiled, never wasted words, and somehow managed to remember everyone's names despite leading more than 100 employees. Around the office, people respected him almost as much as they feared disappointing him. I had exchanged exactly 3 conversations with him in the entire year I'd worked there, and every one of them had been about deadlines. The last person I ever expected to see that night was Adrian Brooks. Noah was halfway through convincing me to try another mocktail when the room seemed to pause around me. Across the dance floor, just beyond the soft blue lights reflecting off the ceiling, stood a man in a charcoal jacket with the sleeves casually rolled to his forearms. Without the office lights, without the conference rooms and polished board tables, he somehow looked younger, more relaxed, more human, but there was no mistaking those steady gray eyes. My heartbeat skipped so suddenly I nearly dropped my glass. Adrian had seen me too. Every possible explanation rushed through my mind. Maybe he was meeting a client. Maybe he had walked into the wrong place. Maybe I was imagining things. Then he smiled. It wasn't the polite corporate smile everyone at work recognized. It was small, genuine, and filled with unmistakable recognition. Before I could turn away or disappear into the crowd, he started walking directly toward me. The music continued around us. Conversations blended into the background, and the colorful lights swept across the room. But everything else faded beneath the sound of my own heartbeat. I had spent an entire year making sure my boss barely noticed I existed. Somehow, in the span of a single Friday night, that plan had completely fallen apart. For a second, neither of us spoke. Adrian stopped only a few feet away, slipping one hand into the pocket of his jacket as though we had accidentally crossed paths at a neighborhood coffee shop instead of somewhere I had never imagined seeing him. "Ethan," he said, saying my name with effortless confidence. I stared at him, completely forgetting how to answer. I had never heard him say my first name outside a conference room. At work it was always, "Could you update the presentation?" or "Please send the revised files before noon." Hearing my name in that warm, relaxed voice felt strangely unfamiliar. "I did not expect to see you here," he continued with the faintest smile. I finally found enough air to respond. I could say the same thing. A quiet laugh escaped him, soft enough that I almost wondered whether I had imagined it. Fair enough. Before the silence became awkward, Noah suddenly appeared beside me carrying 2 fresh drinks. He glanced from Adrian to me, immediately sensing that something unusual was happening. "Friend of yours?" he asked. I opened my mouth, but Adrian answered first. "We work together." Noah's eyebrows lifted with obvious curiosity. "Well, that explains why Ethan suddenly looks like he forgot how to breathe." My face instantly grew warm, while Adrian only smiled again, clearly amused instead of uncomfortable. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Adrian wished us a good evening, nodded politely to Noah, and disappeared into another part of the club before I could think of another sentence to say. I spent the rest of the night pretending to enjoy the music while replaying every second of that conversation inside my head. By Monday morning, I had convinced myself we would never mention it again. That seemed like the only professional solution. Brooks' creative group occupied the top 6 floors of a glass tower overlooking the Chicago River, and by 8:30 the familiar rhythm of keyboards, coffee machines, and client calls had already filled the office. Everything looked exactly the same. Designers argued about color palettes. Account managers rushed between conference rooms. Someone had already burned a bagel in the break room. Normal. Completely normal. Then Adrian walked through the studio. As always, conversations softened for a moment while everyone greeted him. He acknowledged people with calm professionalism, asking about deadlines and upcoming pitches before disappearing toward the executive offices. When he reached my desk, I instinctively looked down at my monitor, pretending to adjust a layout that had been finished since Friday afternoon. "Good morning, Ethan." His voice was calm, exactly as it always was. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." He nodded once and continued walking. That was it. No secret smile. No reference to the weekend. No awkwardness. By lunchtime, I finally relaxed enough to believe I had imagined the tension entirely. Then an email notification appeared in the corner of my screen. The sender was Adrian Brooks. The subject line contained only 2 words: coffee. My pulse quickened as I opened the message. Inside was a single sentence. "Would you have 20 minutes after work today? There is something I have wanted to ask you for a very long time." My finger hovered over the keyboard for nearly a full minute before I typed a reply. "Of course. What time works best?" I read the sentence 3 times before pressing send, wondering whether it sounded too eager or too formal. His response arrived less than 30 seconds later. 6 o'clock. The cafe across the street from the office. Nothing more. No explanation. No hint about what he wanted to discuss. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. Every notification made me glance toward my inbox, half expecting another message, but none came. I tried focusing on client revisions, adjusted logos that did not need adjusting, and rearranged color palettes simply to keep my hands busy. More than once, I caught myself looking toward the executive offices, wondering if Adrian was thinking about the meeting as much as I was. At exactly 6 o'clock, I stepped into the small neighborhood cafe. It was quiet, filled with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee and warm pastries. Adrian was already there, seated near the window with 2 cups waiting on the table. Without his suit jacket, wearing only a light blue dress shirt with the sleeves neatly rolled up, he looked far less intimidating than he ever did inside the office. He stood as I approached. "Thank you for coming. I was curious," I admitted honestly. He smiled faintly. "I assumed you would be." We sat across from each other, and for a few moments the conversation stayed comfortably ordinary. We talked about work, a demanding client, the unusually warm spring weather, and the city's weekend art festival. It almost felt as though we were simply 2 coworkers sharing coffee after work. Then Adrian quietly set down his cup. "Can I ask you something personal?" My shoulders instinctively tensed. "I suppose that depends on the question." He nodded, as though he had expected that answer. "How long have you been going there?" I knew immediately what he meant. "Not very long," I answered. "A friend finally convinced me to go." Adrian looked out the window for a second before returning his attention to me. "I have been going for years." There was no embarrassment in his voice. No hesitation. It was simply a fact. It is one of the few places where nobody expects me to be the company's president every second of the evening. That answer surprised me more than I expected. The man everyone at work viewed as perfectly confident sounded almost relieved describing a place where he could simply exist. Before I could respond, he reached into the inside pocket of his leather portfolio and carefully slid an old photograph across the table. It had clearly been printed years ago. The edges were slightly worn. At first, I only noticed a crowded street during a summer festival. Then I looked closer. Standing near the center of the picture was a younger version of myself, laughing beside Noah while holding a paper cup of lemonade. I stared at the photograph, completely speechless. Adrian watched my expression without interrupting. "That picture was taken almost 4 years ago," he said softly. "Long before you ever applied to Brooks' creative group." My heartbeat became impossible to ignore. I slowly lifted my eyes from the photograph back to him. "Why do you have a picture with me in it?" Adrian held my gaze for several quiet seconds before answering with complete honesty. "Because that was the first day I ever saw you, Ethan. And I never completely forgot your face." The cafe suddenly felt much quieter than before. I looked down at the photograph again, searching for some clue that would explain how a stranger had carried this memory for 4 years. I barely remembered that summer festival. Noah and I had wandered through food trucks, local artists, and live music before watching fireworks over the river. It had been an ordinary Saturday, the kind that quietly disappeared into a lifetime of ordinary Saturdays. Yet somehow, for Adrian, it had become unforgettable. I do not understand, I admitted, carefully placing the photograph back on the table. We never met. No, Adrian agreed. We did not. He leaned back slightly, his expression calm but thoughtful, as though he had replayed this conversation countless times before it finally happened. You were standing at a lemonade stand. A little girl dropped her drawing into a puddle nearby. Most people walked past because they were watching the concert begin. You were the only person who stopped. I blinked, trying to remember. Slowly, fragments returned. A crying child. Wet paper. Colored pencils scattered across the sidewalk. You helped her redraw the picture, Adrian continued. You missed the beginning of the concert because you stayed with her until she smiled again. I laughed quietly, embarrassed. That does sound like something I would do. Adrian smiled. It does. I studied him, still struggling to understand. You remembered all of that? Every detail. There was no exaggeration in his voice. That afternoon had been one of the worst weeks of my life. We had just lost a major client. My father had recently retired, leaving the company entirely in my hands. I spent months believing every decision I made was disappointing someone. His fingers rested loosely around his coffee cup. Then I saw someone choose kindness when nobody expected anything from him. I did not know what to say. No presentation at work had ever made me as nervous as this conversation. Adrian continued before the silence became uncomfortable. I almost walked over to introduce myself that day. Why did you not? He gave a small, almost amused smile. Because my phone rang. Another business emergency. By the time I finished the call, you were gone. We both glanced down at the old photograph. It suddenly felt less like a random picture and more like proof that 2 lives had quietly crossed long before either of us realized it. Then how did I end up working for your company? I finally asked. Adrian shook his head. Coincidence. At least at first. He reached into his portfolio again and placed another document beside the photograph. This time it was a printed resume. My resume. The version I had submitted during my interview almost a year earlier. My signature sat neatly at the bottom of the page. When Human Resources forwarded the finalists for the design position, Adrian said, I recognized your name before I recognized your face. Then I opened your application, saw your portfolio, and remembered the festival immediately. My heart skipped again. Did you hire me because of that? Adrian answered without hesitation. No, your work earned you the job. I made certain the hiring process stayed fair. But I would be lying if I said I was not curious to learn whether the person from that afternoon was as genuine as I remembered. He paused, meeting my eyes with complete sincerity. After watching you work for almost a year, I realized I had remembered you exactly right. The only thing I never expected was seeing you again outside the office and discovering that perhaps we had both been hiding more than one part of ourselves. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Outside the cafe window, people hurried along the sidewalk carrying shopping bags and paper cups, completely unaware that my understanding of the past had shifted in the space of a single conversation. I folded my hands together, trying to organize thoughts that refused to settle. So when you saw me at the club, I finally asked, you already knew exactly who I was. Adrian nodded once. Yes. And you recognized me immediately, the moment you walked through the door. His answer came without hesitation. I let out a slow breath, still trying to understand how 2 completely separate parts of my life had collided in one evening. Were you surprised? I asked. Adrian smiled with quiet honesty. More than surprised. Relieved. That word caught me off guard. Relieved? I had wondered for a long time whether I had imagined the person I remembered. Sometimes we build memories around strangers and convince ourselves they were extraordinary because we never meet them again. Then I watched you work for nearly a year, and every small thing confirmed that my memory had been accurate. I looked down at my untouched coffee. You make me sound better than I really am. No, he replied gently. I think you underestimate yourself. His words lingered longer than I expected. No manager had ever spoken to me that way. No one had described ordinary kindness as though it mattered enough to remember for years. I searched his expression for any sign that this conversation was leading somewhere inappropriate, but there was none. Adrian remained respectful, calm, and careful with every sentence. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course. Why tell me now?" He leaned back slightly before answering. "Because I promised myself that if our paths ever crossed outside the office naturally, I would stop pretending we were complete strangers." He glanced toward the window before continuing. "Seeing you that night reminded me that life rarely gives people the same opportunity twice." His words settled between us with unexpected weight. I thought about the version of Adrian everyone knew inside Brooks' creative group. Decisive, reserved, impossible to read. Sitting across from me now was someone entirely different. Someone who admitted uncertainty, remembered small moments, and valued kindness more than polished presentations. "Does anyone else at work know?" I asked quietly. He smiled and shook his head. "No. My private life stays private, just as yours deserves to stay private." Hearing that lifted a burden I had not realized I was carrying since Friday night. I had feared awkward conversations, office gossip, or assumptions that could complicate my career. Instead, Adrian had protected that boundary without my even asking. We finished our coffee talking about lighter things, favorite museums, books we both enjoyed, and the city's lakeshore during summer mornings. The conversation felt remarkably easy, almost as though we had skipped years of formal introductions. When we stepped outside, the evening air had turned pleasantly cool. We walked toward the office parking garage together before stopping at the corner where our paths separated. Adrian slipped his hands into his coat pockets and offered a warm smile. "Thank you for giving me the chance to explain." I returned the smile without thinking. "Thank you for trusting me with the truth." As I watched him walk away beneath the glowing streetlights, my phone vibrated with a message from Noah. It contained only one sentence. "You are not going to believe what I just found online about Adrian Brooks." I stopped walking beneath the streetlight and opened Noah's message immediately. Before I could reply, another notification arrived containing a link to an old magazine interview with Adrian. Curious, I tapped it. The article was nearly 5 years old, published shortly after Adrian became president of Brooks Creative Group. It praised his leadership, highlighted the company's rapid growth, and described him as one of Chicago's most eligible bachelors. I almost laughed at how completely that description missed the man I had just spent an hour talking with over coffee. Then I reached the final paragraph. One sentence caught my attention. Adrian had founded a private scholarship that anonymously supported students pursuing careers in graphic design and visual arts. The article mentioned that he had personally insisted his name remain hidden from the program. I frowned. That sounded exactly like the person I had met that evening, not the distant executive everyone imagined. Noah called before I could finish reading. "Tell me you saw the scholarship part." I did. "That is not even the interesting part," he said. "Keep scrolling." I did. Several photographs from charity events appeared below the article. Adrian smiled politely beside community organizers, teachers, and students. Then one picture made my breath catch. It showed a summer art festival from 4 years earlier. The same festival. The same afternoon. Different angle. My eyes searched the crowd until I found myself kneeling beside the little girl with the ruined drawing. A few feet away stood Adrian, looking directly toward us. He had been much closer than I ever realized. "You see him?" Noah asked. "Yes." "You were never just a random memory." I stayed silent. Somehow seeing that photograph made Adrian's story feel even more real. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping a normal workday would quiet the thoughts racing through my head. Instead, I found a small envelope resting neatly on my keyboard. There was no name on the outside. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for yesterday. I am glad we no longer have to pretend we met by accident." There was no signature, but I recognized the careful handwriting immediately. Before I could put the note away, my teammate Melissa walked over carrying a stack of presentation boards. "Morning, Ethan," she said cheerfully. "You are popular today." "What do you mean?" She smiled. "Mr. Brooks specifically requested that you join tomorrow's client strategy meeting." I blinked in surprise. "Me? You?" Apparently, he wants the designer who understands the campaign best presenting the creative direction. She shrugged. "Congratulations. That is a huge opportunity." As she walked away, I folded the note and slipped it safely into my notebook. A few minutes later, Adrian entered the studio. He greeted everyone with the same composed professionalism as always, discussing schedules and deadlines before his eyes briefly met mine across the room. There was no lingering glance, no secret smile, nothing that would attract attention. Yet as he continued toward the conference rooms, he gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod, as though acknowledging that yesterday had happened exactly as it should have. I returned my attention to my computer, determined to focus on work, but an uneasy feeling settled in my chest when I noticed two co-workers whispering while occasionally looking in my direction. Whatever they were discussing, I had the unmistakable feeling that our quiet understanding might not remain a secret for much longer. The whispers did not disappear. If anything, they became more noticeable as the day went on. Every office had its own rhythm of quiet conversations, harmless speculation, and coffee break theories, but something about the way a few people glanced toward my desk made me uneasy. I reminded myself that I was probably overthinking everything. After all, Adrian had treated me exactly as he treated everyone else. There had been no favoritism, no unnecessary conversations, and certainly nothing that crossed a professional line. By the following afternoon, the client strategy meeting began in the largest conference room on the 26th floor. Representatives from a national retail brand filled one side of the polished table, while our creative team occupied the other. Adrian led the discussion with his usual confidence, guiding every topic with calm precision. Nearly an hour into the meeting, he turned toward me. "Ethan, would you walk everyone through the visual direction?" My heart raced for a moment, but months of preparation quickly took over. I stood, connected my laptop to the screen, and explained the concept behind the campaign, the color psychology, the typography choices, and the customer experience we hoped to create. As I spoke, I noticed the clients nodding with growing enthusiasm. When I finished, one of their executives smiled broadly. "That is exactly what we have been trying to communicate for months," she said. "Excellent work." Relief washed over me. Adrian simply nodded once before continuing the meeting, never drawing unnecessary attention to my presentation. After the clients left, several co-workers congratulated me. Melissa gave me a quick high five. "I told you that you deserved to be in there." Even Daniel from the marketing department complimented the presentation. For the first time all week, I felt as though things might actually return to normal. That feeling lasted less than 10 minutes. As I gathered my notebook from the conference room, I realized I had forgotten my phone on the table. When I returned to retrieve it, the room was nearly empty. Only two senior managers remained near the doorway, speaking quietly enough that they assumed no one else could hear. "People are already talking," one of them said. It started after someone saw Brooks having coffee with Ethan across the street. The other side. "There is probably an innocent explanation, but human resources cannot ignore rumors involving the company president." I froze before they noticed I was there. Neither of them sounded angry. They sounded concerned. Quietly, I picked up my phone and slipped out through another exit without interrupting their conversation. The elevator ride back to the design floor felt much longer than usual. Every possibility began running through my mind. If questions reached human resources, Adrian's reputation could suffer because of a conversation he had initiated with complete honesty. Even worse, people might assume I had received special treatment despite earning every opportunity through my own work. By the end of the afternoon, I had made a decision. It was the only one that seemed fair. I opened a blank document on my computer and slowly typed the words, "Request for internal department transfer." Before I could finish the first paragraph, my office phone rang. The caller identification displayed only one name, Adrian Brooks. I answered quietly. "Hello." His voice remained calm, but there was an unfamiliar urgency beneath it. "Ethan, please do not submit anything until we have spoken. I think we are about to face a misunderstanding together, and I would rather face it honestly than let either of us carry it alone." My hand remained on the unfinished transfer request while Adrian's words echoed through the receiver. For the first time since I had joined Brooks' creative group, he did not sound like a president giving instructions. He sounded like someone asking for trust. "Where are you?" I asked quietly. "Conference room 7, he replied. "Please come before you make a decision you cannot easily take back." I closed the document without saving it and made my way upstairs. The hallway outside the executive conference rooms was unusually quiet. Adrian was already waiting by the window overlooking the Chicago River. As soon as I entered, he stood and offered a reassuring smile. "Thank you for coming." I folded my arms, trying to steady my thoughts. "People are talking." "I know. Human Resources has probably heard the rumors already." He nodded calmly. "They have." My stomach tightened. "This is exactly why I wanted to transfer. I do not want anyone thinking I received opportunities because of you." Adrian looked directly at me. "Did you earn your presentation yesterday?" "Yes." "Did you deserve to be in that room?" "Yes." "Then I will not allow anyone to rewrite the truth." His confidence surprised me, but I still shook my head. "Perception matters. You are the president of this company. I am one of your employees." Adrian walked to the conference table and placed a thin folder in front of me. Inside were performance reviews from the past year. Every evaluation praised my creativity, reliability, teamwork, and client communication. Several recommendations came from department managers who barely interacted with Adrian. "I asked Human Resources to gather these this morning," he explained. "Not to defend me, to protect you." I slowly turned the pages. Every achievement, every completed campaign, every positive client comment had been documented long before we shared coffee outside the office. "If questions arise," Adrian continued, "these records speak louder than rumors." Before I could answer, there was a gentle knock on the conference room door. Karen Mitchell, the company's human resources director, stepped inside with a warm but professional expression. "I hope I am not interrupting," she said. Adrian invited her in. Karen looked at both of us before speaking. "I know there has been some speculation around the office. I also know there is no evidence of favoritism or policy violations. My responsibility is to ensure everyone is treated fairly, and based on everything we have reviewed, Ethan earned every opportunity through his own work." I felt a wave of relief I had not expected. Karen smiled kindly. "Unfortunately, offices create stories whenever people do not have all the facts. The best response is consistency and professionalism." After she left, silence settled over the room again. I looked at Adrian. "You already spoke with Human Resources before calling me." "Yes," he admitted, "because I refused to let you carry responsibility for something you did not create." I laughed softly, more from relief than amusement. I was ready to leave the department. Adrian shook his head. "I would rather lose my title someday than watch a talented person abandon a career because of gossip." His words were simple, but they carried complete sincerity. At that moment, I realized the distance I had imagined between us had never been built on arrogance or status. It had been built on caution, respect, and timing. As we walked out of the conference room together, we naturally kept several steps apart, just as we always did inside the office. Yet before turning toward his executive office, Adrian paused for only a moment and quietly said, "When the right time comes, I hope neither of us has to keep pretending that fate only introduced us last Friday." The rumors gradually faded, just as Karen had predicted. People eventually found new projects to discuss, new deadlines to worry about, and new stories to tell. Brooks' creative group returned to its familiar rhythm, and so did Adrian and I. We remained professional inside the office, speaking only when work required it, respecting every boundary that had protected both of us from misunderstanding. Yet outside those glass walls, something quietly changed. We discovered a shared appreciation for neighborhood bookstores, Sunday mornings at the Art Institute of Chicago, long walks beside Lake Michigan, and small cafes where nobody recognized the president of a creative agency or one of its designers. We never rushed to define what was growing between us. After everything we had learned, patience felt more meaningful than certainty. Several months later, Brooks' creative group celebrated another successful year with record growth. During the annual company meeting, Adrian announced a leadership restructuring that surprised everyone. He had appointed a new managing director to oversee daily operations while he shifted his attention toward mentorship, education, and community design initiatives. His speech focused on creating opportunities for young artists who simply needed someone to believe in them. As I listened from the audience, I immediately thought about the little girl at the summer festival and the stranger who had quietly remembered a single act of kindness for years. Some stories truly did come full circle. Nearly a year after that unexpected evening changed both our lives, I received another invitation from Adrian. This time it was not an email asking for coffee. It was an invitation to attend the opening of a nonprofit design studio that would provide internships and scholarships for students who could not otherwise afford creative education. The building stood only a few blocks from the same festival where our paths had unknowingly crossed years before. As guests explored the bright new workspace, I noticed framed artwork created by young designers covering the walls. Near the entrance hung a familiar photograph from the summer festival. This time it was displayed intentionally. Beneath it was a small plaque that read, "The smallest acts of kindness often create the longest journeys." I turned toward Adrian, who had been quietly watching my reaction. "You kept it," I said with a smile. "It reminded me that success means very little if it cannot help someone else," he answered. I looked around the room filled with students laughing, sketching ideas, and dreaming about futures that suddenly seemed possible. "You built all of this because of one memory?" Adrian shook his head gently. "No, I built it because that memory reminded me of the person I wanted to become." We stepped outside as the evening sun settled over the Chicago skyline. The same city that had once hidden us in separate lives now felt unexpectedly small. I smiled as I remembered the frightened designer who had nearly spilled a drink after recognizing his boss across a crowded room. If someone had told that version of me that a chance encounter would eventually lead to friendship, trust, and the courage to stop hiding behind carefully built walls, I never would have believed it. Adrian glanced toward me with the same quiet smile I had first seen outside the office, genuine and unguarded. "Funny is not it," he said. "What is?" I asked. "We spent years thinking we had missed our chance to meet." I smiled back as we continued walking side by side through the fading light. Maybe we simply met at exactly the right time.